I know that you have experienced burnout and even PTSD yourself, and I wonder if you could begin by just telling us a bit about your story.
Yeah, for sure. So my first CTO gig was in 2006. I was quite a young fellow. I was 26 years old. And I sort of fell into the CTO role almost by default because there was nobody in the technology team who was capable of building a strategy or kind of translating the needs of the business, the technologists. But I did all that through best effort, if that makes sense. So I was successful to a point, but at the same time, I had no idea of how to actually manage the demands on my energy and my resources. And I took way too much onto my shoulders. And being in the C-suite, that
Mm-hmm.
means the success or the failure of the company, right? So I very much did not have the skills to manage that at all. And being honest, I don't think anyone else in the C-suite did either, which is a very common scenario for a startup. But it
Yeah.
meant I got no support, and I continued taking more and more onto my shoulders. I got gradually too far away from the code because I spent my whole time building out processes and supporting the team members and helping them succeed in what they were doing. But I had no support for myself really, and that essentially led to me just running out of steam.
Right.
And it was a process which took maybe 2 years, but it was a very clear trajectory when I look back on it that I was always going to burn out at some point in that role.
Can I ask, what was that? I mean, you described you're a new CTO, untrained essentially. You just sort of, okay, I'll be CTO, and in you go. So do you think that the burnout was triggered by almost a lack of skills and not knowing what you're doing? Or was that not the problem, but you were literally just overworking yourself?
Both, absolutely. But also, I'd say it's not knowing whether what you are doing is the right thing, because there was no point of reference. Essentially, I'd never been in a company that had a good CTO or a good technology leader. So a lot of what I was doing was guesswork, right, and not
Right.
having some way of validating that I was doing the right things. So there's that, plus not having the right skills to build the team and to build the technology and so on. And then just poor energy management and poor personal resource management, basically.
Yeah. What did that look like? Were you sort of doing 20-hour days, 7 days a week, or?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't necessarily the amount of time I was spending behind the keyboard, although I was spending quite a lot of time. I did a couple of 72-hour days, which I wouldn't recommend to anyone.
No.
But it wasn't necessarily that I was working long days all the way through and it just burnt through me. It was more the type of work and the type of challenges and the type of interpersonal and commercial challenges and so on, just the sheer weight of them. There's a term that psychologists use, which is startup trauma, and
Okay.
it is very common in the sort of the startup world. That's because you're doing so much so quickly at such speed and quite commonly without enough experience in how to manage that stuff. The leaders do tend to burn out. But yeah, I think it was just that it was brand new, very demanding kind of stakeholders, VC backed, um, not really knowing whether I was doing the right thing and just not able to reconcile all of that or take enough time to myself to figure it out.
You come across as a very calm, pragmatic, conscientious person.
Mhm.
But when you were there and you were burning out, what did other people around you see?
So it's a really good question. I think probably they didn't see the whole story. I was not very good at talking to people about how I was reacting to the amount of stress that I was under. I think they would have seen me much more direct and snappy maybe than I am these days. I think the other C-level people probably would have seen a bit more about how stressed I was, and that they never fed that back to me. But I think it's pretty clear that they knew that I was not enjoying what I was doing, put it that way, and I certainly wasn't enjoying the role.
So when you look back, what signs were there that maybe you missed could you have identified, or maybe you did know you were burning out, but you didn't respond to the signs?
I certainly wouldn't have put a label on it that I was burning out. I obviously felt stress, and I felt like I wasn't delivering what I wanted to be able to deliver. I could see it going in a certain negative direction, shall we say. And towards the end, when I was, much, much further down that trajectory of burning out, I could certainly feel that I was caring less, and I was withdrawing, and I was, not involving myself in some of the thornier challenges that the team was facing, for example. But also I was avoiding confrontation within the company. So I was actively stepping away from the kind of things that I would have normally got involved with, and trying to smooth certain situations out and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But also from a physical point of view, I was getting quite ill quite regularly. Some migraines and musculoskeletal problems and all sorts of stuff. But then, it was obvious that I was not doing well. But being naive in the sort of the startup, fast-paced world, there was a part of me that said to myself, "Well, this is just normal. This is what people have to deal with." So yeah, again, immaturity, not having been around teams that didn't work that way. I kind of assumed that was the normal.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you about that, because I think if you are in a senior leadership position, or if you are in a startup which is scruffy and messy and, almost getting through by the skin of its teeth, it seems like part of the territory. It almost seems like, yep, I know I'm going to be stressed and stretched and under pressure. That's normal and expected. But when does it cross over into what you might now call burnout?
Yeah, I think that's highly personal. So, I think there are some people that thrive under that eustress. There's a technical term for that. There's eustress, which is
Eustress and distress, isn't it? It's the two opposites. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, eustress and distress rather. And there are people who function all their lives under high levels of eustress, and they can manage the extreme cortisol in the brain and all the stuff, and their blood pressure problems, and they can sustain that all the way through. You look at like politicians and traders, and they thrive on that. But I think maybe in the technology world, there's a slight difference, because although you get constant feedback on your successes, and in the startup world, you're able to close the feedback loop from what you're doing and what you're working on pretty quickly, especially nowadays with like AI prototyping, that sort of stuff. It's quite ephemeral. And I think that's what sets it apart from other industries. Traders, they're just making bank. So, it's almost worth it. A consultant in a hospital, high levels of eustress there, obviously, but they're saving lives. They're saving people. So it's quite different in technology. I think we attach a certain level of value to what we do because there are VCs involved, and because we see Nvidia and Meta in the news. And then it's quite difficult to kind of extract yourself from that expectation that what you do will be as big or as useful to as many people or whatever it is.